Is it bullshit? The word homosexual didn't appear in the Bible until 1983, and the original Leviticus 18:22 verse said man shall not lie with young boys as he does with women, referring to pedophiles, not gays. Okay, I wrote a research paper on Leviticus 18:22 way back in the day. It was in high school, so I'm not sure how accurate I was, and I can't find any of my old research. But I remember the conclusions I came to, so I'll post them here. It is not exactly referring to pedophiles, and it is also very likely not referring to homosexuals. It is referring to cultural and idolatrous practices of neighboring lands. Leviticus 18:22 is in the context of a whole series of verses describing and forbidding the idolatrous actions of neighboring lands. Leviticus 18:1 Then the Lord said to Moses, 2:0 give the following instructions to the people of Israel. I'm the Lord your God. 3:0 So do not act like the people in Egypt, where you used to live, or like the people of Canaan, where I'm taking you. You must not imitate their way of life. Then, after listing a bunch of forbidden stuff, Leviticus 18:24:0 Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways. For the people I'm driving out before you had defiled themselves in all these ways. Most of the actions being forbidden in Leviticus 18:1-27 are various forms of sexual acts, mostly incest, which is why this section is usually read as the sexual taboo section. But Leviticus 18:21 does not mention sex at all, and instead forbids child sacrifice. The explanation I found for all this is that these sexual practices, incest, sex during menstruation, bestiality, child sacrifice, and sex between males, were religious practices of Canaanites and Egyptians. Apparently, male Egyptian priests had a custom of ritualized sex with each other for certain circumstances/festivals, and same with bestiality and sex with menstruating women. Child sacrifice to Moloch was actually a well-documented Canaanite practice. They would throw them into a giant bronze statue heated by fire, which is why the actual Hebrew language of Leviticus 18:21, I speak Hebrew, translates to, you shall not let your offspring pass through the fire to Moloch. Furthermore, incest between certain types of relatives was considered acceptable in Canaanite society, which is why Leviticus 18:1-18 goes into extreme detail about every single type of incestuous relationship you are not allowed to have. So while God is indeed trying to forbid certain types of sexual practice here, the focus isn't intended to be on casual homosexual relations. The focus is intended to be on distinguishing Israel from the religious and cultural practices of the nations around it. Religious and cultural practices which, in my opinion, were pretty ducked up, and which God was absolutely right to forbid. Hence why this is the only time in the Old Testament that gay sex is forbidden. Lesbian sex is not mentioned and not forbidden. And the entire passage is bookended by reminders about how these are things that the Egyptians and Canaanites do. The conclusion I came to is that God doesn't give two shits if you're having gay sex in a consensual relationship. What God cares about is turning sex into a way to worship false gods. I'm pretty sure the term homosexual does not appear in the Bible at all. Also, why the heck is most called Leviticus in the US? What I'm taking from this is, regardless of which translation is correct, lesbianism is a-okay. It is incorrect. Leviticus 18:22 KJV reads, 22, Thou shalt not lie with mankind, as with womankind, it is abomination. Mankind is translated from the Hebrew word ZKR or H2145 in the Strong's Concordance. The definition of ZKR in Strong's is listed as, properly remembered, that it's a male of man or animals as being the most noteworthy 6x him, male, man, child, kind. ZKR thus refers to male, a man and or man-child. The literal translation of Leviticus 18:22 would be, and with a zakah, you shall not lie as with a woman. It is an abomination. This word zakah means male, and it is the same word used in Genesis when it says that God created humans male and female, or when it says that animals came into the ark in pairs, male and female. The only parts of the Bible where this word could be translated as boy would be in Isaiah 66. 7 and Jeremiah 20:15, though these talk about someone having a male child. So though the word homosexual doesn't appear, there is a reference to homosexuality because this was quite common in other cultures outside of Israel. It's known that there was male-on-male sacred prostitution in the Phoenician temples of Astarte as well as in Babylonian temples. So this prohibition isn't only moral, but it's also one of the many laws Israel had in its permanent quest to set itself apart from other cultures. I see a lot of good discussion here. But let's also not forget that more often than not male-on-male intercourse in the Old Testament, especially pre-David, was rape for power. We see this with Lot and the angels in Sodom and Gomorrah. The men outside call for the strangers to rape them, but Lot offers them his daughter. Dick move Lot. But also if they were explicitly gay, why offer the daughter at all? A similar story happens in Judges, where a Levite stays in a stranger's home, and men come to rape him. The owner of the home offers his concubine, and they rape her to do death. A lot of scholars reference these passages by then concluding that the Bible is prohibiting rape rather than same-sex intercourse. This is also a possible explanation for why they don't specifically also target female-female intercourse. My whole issue with this, as a Christian, it's the very reason we are Christians is because Jesus came to tell us the old ways and rules no longer applied, making the Old Testament and our history, and thus began the New Testament and our new way of living as Christians under the teachings of Jesus, of which his condemnation of gays and lesbians there were none. He did however really stress not judging one another and loving one another. Two things most of these homo-hating Christians seem to not do. Go figure. What is with the religious and their fascination with sex, especially, but not limited in the least, to gay sex, probably cause religions evolved for survival purposes. Religious rules could dictate efficiently large swaths of behavior. Sacrifice your life for your God. That made cultures more likely to continue onwards. And a big part of that was breeding. Were laws that forced people to behave in ways that propagated themselves the most effectively survived. Not saying it's beneficial to human happiness, but trying to force everybody into breeding pairs probably helped. I've never come across a Bible that contains the word homosexual in any scripture bits, but it is in the teaching sections of a book I own as part of the index. Original translation in my oldest King James Antique was lay not with mankind as you will womankind. It is an abomination. So that sounds pretty solidly anti-homosexual either way. Here's how I interpreted homosexual relationships back then aren't the same as how they are today. They were mostly lustful and were strictly pleasure oriented and had nothing to do with the traditional purpose of sex, which was to bring the pair together as one. And since sex between two men was never seen as anything but pure lust, and gay marriages were completely out of the question, that would make this a sin of lust, the same way sleeping with a prostitute or a married woman would. It's the translation issue. Depends which version you read. Makes sense given lying with a young girl was fair game. My cousin is studying classics at Oxford. Having changed from theology, he told me, if you read the original Greek, the word can actually be translated in many other ways, such as condemning sex trafficking and pimps. He believes some of the early bishops imposed their bias when translating, assuming the disciples whom wrote the Bible meant homosexuality. Never forget, people will go to great lengths to justify their actions. Okay, so there are a lot of well-meaning people giving answers here, but none of them have the full answer. I've studied theology, so I'm going to give you the answer that is taught by theologians. So, the term homosexual obviously doesn't appear in the Bible, because it wasn't written in modern English. I'm sure that there's some neat stuff on the etymology used in the original languages, but that's not the important part. What is important is that, either through direct verses stating that men shouldn't lie with men, or through verses saying that only men and women should lie with each other, we know that the Old Testament preaches that it is wrong. But the Old Testament has a bunch of weird rules, right? Like fabric and what you can eat, and stuff that no Christian follows today. So how can they say homosexuality is wrong? The Old Testament, and the rules in it, represent something called the Old Covenant. The Jews had to follow these rules in order to please God. However, once Jesus came, according to the New Testament and prophecies in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant was abolished. The Bible mentions the curtain of the temple being torn when Jesus was crucified, and that was to show that the Old Covenant was abolished and now people had a direct way to God. Research Jewish Old Testament temples sometime for a cool read. Anyway, during Jesus' time on earth, he either directly or indirectly undid the Old Covenant and laid the ground for the New Covenant. His actions and words showed which of those things were no longer necessary, like when he healed people on the Sabbath, touched the unclean, etc. Close bracket. Further, the apostles who had direct contact with God and Jesus were given more information, like when Peter had the vision about eating pork and other meats. This means we were left with a new covenant and moral guidelines. While much of the Old Covenant is null, some was left, and we know this by the writings of the apostles and the actions of Jesus. Paul writes many times about sexual sins and what is wrong and right, and this is why Christians see homosexuality as a sin. Lastly, though, any Christian worth his salt knows that it isn't a worse sin than any other, and that those who struggle with homosexual feelings are still to be loved. It isn't the feeling or the temptation that is seen as wrong, but the giving into it. For a good read further on that subject, I recommend Spiritual Friendship by Wesley Hill. The entire Bible is full of conflicting and horribly inaccurate statements. Who cares anymore? Apparently there is some translational evidence that it refers to gay incest being as bad as straight incest. That also makes sense, because the surrounding passages are about that as well. It seems like people, unsurprisingly, picked an ambiguous part of the Bible and spun it out for their own agenda. Why are people so obsessed with pretending that Abrahamic religions have always been compatible with homosexuality when their history from onset has been anti-sodomy? If it was referring to pedos and not gays, then gays at that time wouldn't have been persecuted. While on the topic, how do religious people who think this verse is about homosexuals reconcile with friends, relatives, coworkers who are gays? I'm sure not everyone will disown their kids. Just wondering. So, you're correct that the word homosexual didn't appear in the original Hebrew or Greek, which makes sense, because the word wasn't even coined till way later. However, the passage you're referring to doesn't, to the best of my knowledge, use the word young. Thou shalt not lay with men as you lay with women. Some say this excludes lesbianism, but Romans 1:26-27 is kinda clear, taken from the New World Translation. For their females changed the natural use of themselves into one contrary to nature. Likewise also the males left the natural use of the female and became violently inflamed in their lust toward one another. Males with males, working what is obscene, and receiving in themselves the full penalty, which was due for their error. Just found this translation. 22/0 You must not lie down with a male in the same way that you lie down with a woman. It is a detestable act. New World Translation. I have a lot of downtime and language, and its translation is something I find intriguing. Are you asking this because you're not sure if homosexuality is a sin according to God/the Bible? From my, albeit limited understanding, that section was in reference to purity laws and was mostly focused on prostitution. Looks like God should given clearer instructions when inspiring the writer of this passage. He should also run it by heaven's legal counsel. The Bible is a contract of adhesion. So, any ambiguities are ruled against the party who drew up the contract. Make sure you have a good lawyer with you on Judgment Day. Even if that is true, it's encouraging pedophilia with girls instead of guys, which would still be against being gay. Bullshit. The Jews had been interpreting the passage, which they created, in the exact same way for centuries before Christianity ever emerged. I always thought it was odd that the Bible forbids people to do so many things, but slavery and pedophilia aren't on the list. Yes, I have Bibles older than that, and it says, "Shall not lie with a man." I have multiple translations of various ages, the oldest from the 1950s. None of them say young before man. The word itself may not have appeared, but the meaning of being against homosexuality has always been there. I think a lot of folks are forgetting about the term sodomy, which in many Bibles is a euphemism for male-on-male sex, even though it can be done with a woman. Since no relevant term was coined for homosexual sex, this was probably the closest catch-all. Not at all my beliefs, but it's the nearest explanation to how gay men were labeled. The Bible is very okay with sex with young women though. Well, yes and no. In that era, concubines were a thing that a lot of powerful men had. I'm not saying it's right or that I agree with it, but that's how it was. However, times have changed. A lot of modern things aren't accepted nor evoked in the Bible because they simply didn't exist yet. Likewise, many things that God wasn't against, that doesn't mean he was for it, don't happen today. There's both a good and a bad side to your comment here. This is easily googled. The original English Bible was the 1611 King James Version. This is the exact verse, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind. As with womankind, it is abomination." I'm not sure what version you are referencing. That came out in 1983. But short answer, at least half your statement is bullshit. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.